All right, welcome everyone to this live stream. I'm very glad to have with us a couple of esteemed guests from the channel Sneakers Corner. That is Sneakers Corner, not Speakers Corner. The channel is in the description box if you'd like to check that out. Let me take this off so I stop hearing myself talk. There we go. Channel's in the description box. It is a reconstructionist or a revisionist account, depending on how you want to look at it, of the early history of Islam, asking some very important questions and some very critical questions about early Islamic history. So we have, how many on your team, Mel, on the Sneakers Corner channel right now?
Well, that's a good question. I've lost count. I think I suppose there's about 5 core members, and then there's maybe 100 associate members in different ways. So
one of those,
it's a big tent.
And one of those core members is Murad, who is joining us for the first time on the channel. Welcome, Murad.
Thank you for having me, Colin. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
All right. So before we get into our topic, which was Zaid was not Muhammad's adopted son, Mel, can you tell us what direction your channel is currently headed in?
Well, from my side of things, we've tended to split our workload in a sense. I've been focusing on the Iraqi, Syrian origins of Islam, and Murad will speak for himself, has tended to go further east. I'm very much focused on the early 7th century most of the time. And in particular, at the minute, I'm concerned with the idea of the Quran as a lectionary. Or let me clarify that a bit more. The idea that the Quran is referring to another book, which is a lectionary. This is a theory that has been expounded by Odin Lafontaine, who was a guest there last week. And it's also a theory that one of the members of our team also has expounded, which is Joe. And I think this is a very fruitful sort of area of research at the minute. And it radically changes our picture of what exactly the Quran is. So that's one of the main areas that I'm looking at the moment. I'm also scouring the Chinese sources at the minute. I have a special contact somewhere in China who cannot be identified, a very prestigious person who is translating ancient Chinese sources, which is proving very interesting indeed, because it suggests that the Islamic narrative has changed and we have definite evidence, whereas before we supposed that the narrative got changed, but we couldn't really prove it. We just had a lot of hunches, whereas we have a clear record in the Chinese sources that basically the Chinese themselves are saying that they received a message from the envoys of the Tayyaye, the group which founded this Islamic revolution. And they're scratching their heads saying the story has changed from the last envoy's visit. And so they decided to write records of both versions of accounts, which is fascinating. But there's more material on the way. So I'm holding off these days until I get the last of the translation. So this is material that won't have been ever heard of in the West before. It's kind of been stored away in China really for centuries. And Western scholars have basically ignored this for a long time, maybe because of Western bias, I'm not too sure. But yeah, so that's a quick summary of what I'm looking at the minute.
So you have Muslims or proto-Muslims traveling to China over a given period of time and changing their story of the origin of their people or the origin of their religion. And the Chinese sources reflect this. Is that correct?
Exactly. I think one of the big takeaways is that they are telling the Chinese that their founders were Persian and not Arab. That's the big giveaway. And they're essentially exploiting the Arabs for their own purposes. So the Arabs are doing all their fighting for them. They make up a large portion of their fighting troops, but the elite are the Persians themselves, as it had always been for centuries before that. So they changed the name on the door, but essentially it's the Persians still in charge. That's the big story, and it's obviously it's a confusing story because it requires a bit of explaining to do in terms of why they would want to create a story about an Arabic prophet in that context. So it could be the simple explanation could be that they are exploiting the Arabs, and one way of exploiting them is actually to make one of their own a hero, so as to hide the fact that they're actually being used by a foreign force. You know, so that's where we're at the minute. It's a fascinating discovery, and quite revolutionary, I think. So, yeah,
it's absolutely fascinating. Murad, what are you up to these days?
Well, I'm more into the Quran. I'm more concerned with the Quran, especially its language, because I think its original language was actually Aramaic. So I tried to look at what the Quran originally meant. So this is major revision. Even how does the Quran see Jesus? I think it sees that he was crucified and he made the redemption and the sacrifice exactly like how the Christians think of Jesus. This is when you read it in the Aramaic version. When people Arabize it, it got corrupted. And that's why you have all these qira'ats and they're all wrong because they are already Arabized. Another interesting thing about the Chinese sources is that they boil it down exactly to a date, which is 750s. Am I still on?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Yes, 750s is exactly the time where you have the second Abbasid Caliph Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. This is the guy who asked Ibn Ishaq to write the Sirah of Rasulullah, the biography of Muhammad. So you can hunt it down exactly to this point where he made Baghdad, he made this major revision, and he made the new story. So then they removed the old Tayyaye story and had this new Arab empire and the new story. So this is about the Chinese sources. And this is where I'm going at. I'm trying to actually translate the Quran, not the whole of it, but some important surahs, and putting together all the Aramaic, all the Hebrew, all the stuff, so that it comes to a much clearer version of what actually it used to say. And that's all that I have now.
Oh, that's all. Okay, just translating the Quran and working on Chinese sources. Okay, did I hear you correctly that you said you believe the Quran affirms the crucifixion? Did I hear that?
Yes, in the Aramaic version, when you read it in the Aramaic version, that's what it says. It doesn't say he was not crucified. If you read this in Aramaic, it will be ma salabuhu, means and that who they crucified, not they not crucified. And that who they crucified is exalted and something like this. And it was speaking to the Marys, Mary, mother of Jesus, and the other Mary. So this is when you see it. And I have a video in Sneakers Corner, and it's referring to that, the original Aramaic, just on this verse, if people want to check that out.
Oh, yeah, I have not seen that, but I will check that out. I'm very curious about that. So yeah, excellent. And is that, are you referring specifically to 4157, or are you describing another verse right now?
I'm describing the verse, I don't know the number, which says
Okay.
they have not crucified him.
I think it would be 4157.
Yeah. After this live stream, let's go check that out, everybody. I'm interested in that. That the question of whether or not the Quran affirms or denies the crucifixion. It's interesting. Such an important topic, and a topic that is so certain historically has been a topic of debate for centuries in the Muslim world because of that single ayah. All right. Well, we have the topic today that Murad's going to jump into. Before we get into this topic, Murad, could you give us the summary story, the traditional story that you'll be interacting with?
The traditional story is that there was a person called Zaid, and this Zaid, Muhammad adopted him. So he was his adopted son, and he and even his son Osama, they went to war afterwards and stuff. And he is one of the few people who is supposedly named in the Quran by his name. This is, of course, a great glory to him. And the verse is that Muhammad was not the father of anyone, and it's basically the verse which abolishes adoption as we know it today.
Yeah, he's not only named in the Quran, but he's called one who Allah has blessed, and that's a phrase typically used of prophets. So he's very, very highly esteemed in the Quran. That's 33:37. So, well, let's get into your presentation then and hear your perspective on this very interesting event?
Okay, I started actually right off from the earliest version that we have of it. And the earliest version is not Islamic. It comes from Saint John of Damascus. Now, John of Damascus, he was working with the Umayyad Caliphate. And he was very knowledgeable, and I think you know more about him. And he wrote regarding the Ishmaelite heresy, as he called it in the day, which is Islam as we know. This is the account that he wrote concerning this part. He wrote a lot about Islam, but this is the part where I'm looking at. He said Muhammad had a friend named Zaid. This man had a beautiful wife with whom Muhammad fell in love. Once they were sitting together, Muhammad said, "Oh, by the way, God has commanded me to take your wife." The other answered, "You are an apostle. Do as God has told you and take my wife." Rather, to tell the story over the beginning, he said to him, "God has given me the command that you put away your wife." And he put her away. It's interesting that John of Damascus never saw this sonship thing, and he referred to him clearly as a friend. Zaid was Muhammad's friend. Then, of course, it continues and says, "Then several days later, now he said, God has commanded me to take her." Then, after he had taken her and committed adultery with her, he made this law: let him who will put away his wife, and if after having put her away he should return to her, let another marry her, for it is not lawful to take her unless she had been married by another. And we can see it in the Quran. So we see that Saint John of Damascus is not naive. He knows what he's talking about. Now, there is another translation, and this comes from David S. Powers, who wrote a very important book called Muhammad Was Not the Father of Any of Your Men. And here it says, Mamid had a co-worker named Zaid. And then it continues. So here it's co-worker named Zaid. Saint John of Damascus doesn't see this connection that Zaid was ever an adopted son. Now, going here to the first people to mention this in Islamic sources. Here, David S. Powers says, to the best of my knowledge, the first Muslim commentator to mention the name of Zayd's wife was Mujahid ibn Jabr. And you see the date here is 720, of whose tafsir is the earliest extant commentary of the Quran. I checked this and I confirmed that it is right. Now here we have this verse. O Prophet, say to your wives, if you desire the life of this world and the luxury, then come, I will provide to you and let you go graciously. Now we are still here with Mujahid ibn Jabr. And he said, the Prophet abandoned them, then he let them choose. And that was about Zainab, daughter of Jahsh, who hated to marry Zayd ibn Haritha, when the Prophet ordered her to do so. Here, the first mention of Zainab, and you see the story has a little twist. She didn't want to marry Zayd, when actually the Prophet is the one who ordered her to do so. This is the first tafsir ever. The commentary of Ibn Mujahid never mentioned that Zayd was Muhammad's adopted son. Now here I just put this original Arabic so that Muslims don't say you don't know Arabic. No, I actually translated it from the Arabic. Now here we have Muqatil ibn Sulaiman. So that was Mujahid, the first one. Now let's go to Muqatil. Again, David Powers says, to the best of my knowledge, first Muslim commentator to connect Zainab bint Jahsh with this Quran 33-37 was Muqatil ibn Sulaiman. Whereas Mujahid knows or chooses to relate only a bare bones outline of the episode relating to Muhammad, Zaid and Zainab. Muqatil tells his audience, with all due respect, nearly everything that one might want to know about this episode but afraid to ask. Muqatil's treatment of the episode takes the form of a combination of short phrasetic comments supplemented by extended narratives, none of which are accompanied by isnads, because the commentator proceeds on verse-by-verse basis. Now here, up the individual components of the story in order to link them to the event Quranic verses. Just the important part here is that it is immediately followed by the announcement that Muhammad is the son of the prophets. This is something that's very weird when you get in the verse. Muhammad was not the father of any of your men, and he was the seal of the prophets. Now, why does this have to do with anything? Now, I want to show you where is this guy, Muqatil ibn Sulaiman, is from. And this is a question that I don't know, no one asks. People ask about the dates, why are the traditions so late? But they don't ask, where did this guy come from? This guy was from this area, a man from Balkh. It's far Asia. And you see, he should be around here. He should get the stories from here or a little further here. But he is someone from here who is telling us about Muhammad and Zainab and Zaid. Muqatil ibn Sulaiman's reputation. What is the reputation of this guy from the Muslim sources? Now it says that there is, however, an anonymous consensus that Muqatil was not a scholar. This is from the Islamic sources. He was not a scholar. He did not use the isnads, which is the chain of narration, properly. Amidst the scholars of Islam, Muqatil's reputation is that of a storyteller. So this is what the Muslims view him. This is from Islamic sources. Another funny thing that he said is that Allah has a body, and he is a body on the image of a human flesh and blood and hair and bone. He has vultures and organs of hand and leg and tongue and head and eyes. And he is, with all that said, doesn't look like anyone or anyone looks like him. And Al-Jawabri said that he used to say, hollow from his mouth all the way to his chest. Of course, he might be describing something like this, the statue of Allah, which was found in Arabia. And this is the reference. Now, Muqatil ibn Sulaiman, he died in 767. You see how far that is from the actual event of Muhammad and Zayd and all of that. And when you say to the one from whom Allah has done favor, and you have done a favor, keep your wife and fear Allah while concealing within yourself what Allah revealed. And consider the people whereas Allah is more worthy of your consideration. This is in Arabic, أَتَخْشَى النَّاسُ وَاللَّهَ أَحَقَّ أَن تَخْشَى. It means how come you fear people and you should fear Allah. So when Zayd lost his interest in her, we gave her to you in marriage, so that there would be no blame on the believers for marrying the ex-wives of their adopted sons after the divorce. And Allah's command is totally binding. So what we see is actually the first one. The first to connect Zainab bint Jahsh with this verse is Muqatil ibn Sulaiman, this guy from Balkh. This is what David Power said, and I confirmed when I looked back at it. He is the first to mention Zayd as Muhammad's adopted son. This guy from Balkh. Now, actually, there is a biblical underlayer to this. There is this concept of this biblical topology that actually there is biblical substrata to everything in Islam. Not everything, but a lot of things. This comparison, again, from Dr. David Powers. He said that Zayd is Uriah the Hittite. Several themes or motifs in 2 Samuel 11, one of the pretexts of Quran 33, 37, were transferred to the Islamic narratives about Zayd. Just as the beautiful wife of Uriah the Hittite is spied by King David while she is in the act of bathing, so to the beautiful wife of Zayd, Ibn Muhammad is espied by his father while she is in the act of standing up. قائمة. Whereas Uriah's wife exposed herself in public, the exposure of Zaid's wife take place within the privacy of her home. Whereas David is unable to control his sexual desires and acting in secret sins by engaging in sexual relations with Uriah's wife, but only after she has purified herself. Now, actually, there was a letter between Omar II and Leo III, and when they mentioned this episode, Omar told them, well, what about Uriah the Hittite? And this is interesting. Now, before I go to this, I want to ask you if there is any comments or something.
Yeah, can I just jump in? Something that struck me is the similarity between the name Zaid and David. If we just change a dot on the letter D, we get the letter Z in Arabic, if I'm not mistaken. And we have the last letter D. The only thing that seems to be different is the V sound. Is that possible that this is where this helped influence the choice of the name Zaid, or is that just a coincidence, would you say?
No. I think in Arabic, there is no relation at all. In Arabic, David would be Dawood or Daoud, has nothing to do with Zaid.
Okay.
Has nothing to do with it.
So, Murad, do you think that the criticism of Muqatil ibn Sulaiman that he didn't use isnad chains correctly is anachronistic because they hadn't been fully developed yet?
I think so, yes, but it's not important what I think in this regard. It's important to see how even the Islamic sources see this. And it's interesting to see where is this guy from. I think this is very crucial, actually.
Yeah, it's just interesting to see anachronistic criticisms of Muslim scholars, right? Like Tabari, who it seems to be another example parallel to that, where Tabari rejected readings that were later considered canonical, and now he's criticized for rejecting canonical readings when there was no such thing at his time. And I was just wondering if there's a similar case there with Muqatil ibn Sulaiman. So we still do have the mention of adopted sons in verse 37. So is it too early to say where that fits in to all of this, or do you want to put that off until later on? So do you think that's an early layer of this story in the Quran in verse 37 of Surah 33?
Have we lost him?
Oh, I think maybe. I hope not. Yes, we did. We'll see if he joins up again. That now I'm just on a cliffhanger with that question. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully the power didn't go on him.
We did lose Murad.
Yeah.
He was sounding fine up until then, so
yeah.
Maybe you just hit a wrong button. Let's give him a couple minutes and see if he joins back up with us. Otherwise, this will be the biggest cliffhanger live stream in history.
You need a keyboard here. Dun dun dun.
It's amazing what YouTube is hiding in these comments. Seriously, somebody said Indonesia in answer to where are you from. YouTube censors it. It's unbelievable. Thanks, Ryan Joseph, for the super chats. He says, Assalamu alaikum, love your work. And he also says, a glass of water from the garage, Yasser Qadi special, the gift that keeps on giving. Yes, I'm in the garage. Somebody bring me a glass of water. All right, there's Murad again. Let's see if I can add him to the stream. Murad, you're back.
Yes, 1 minute. I will just get the PowerPoint back.
Okay.
Just while you're getting that, I think
from my side, I can do it as well.
One of the things I just comment just in passing as well is the fact that all the weird stuff seems to come from Iran and Balk and places like that. You know, like the idea of being interested in one's adopted son's wife and that kind of thing. You know, that seems to be foreign from the Arab culture. So we got to, you know, when we look at the Hadiths, the Hadiths are full of these weird sort of stories. It's like a fantasy world, but we don't find that in the Arab culture itself. It's foreign to it. And so when you examine where did these stories come from again and again, you find that it was someone either in Iran or Khorasan or elsewhere, Afghanistan, that's been writing down these odd stories. But,
Okay,
Okay.
Murad, I can see your PowerPoint, so if you're ready for me to add it back, I can do that.
Yes.
Okay. Here we go. All right, and you are back up.
Okay, so now we will see the timeline. How Zayd became Muhammad's adopted son. First thing, Muhammad died supposedly in 632. Then we have silence and a big gap about this story. Zainab's name is mentioned first time here before 722, and Muhammad ordered her to marry Zayd. This is a little different than we know. He ordered her to marry Zayd, and this is in Mujahid's commentary. Now, in the 730s, Muhammad is mentioned as a co-worker or a friend by Saint John of Damascus. Now, remember that this is a polemicist. This guy didn't like Islam. If he knew about this, he would definitely hit Muhammad with it. But he didn't know because it was not yet invented. This is the logical answer. Not because he was naive. We can see from all these writings that this guy knew a lot. He was not a silly man. Now, finally, Muhammad is adopted son. Zayd, is Muhammad adopted son before 767 because the guy died in this year. He didn't write the year he died, he wrote a little before it. So it will be in Muqatil's commentary. So you see here that Muhammad now has this adopted son in the Abbasid era. It's after 750 and before 767. It comes from a guy from Balkh. And you see here the gap, of course, when this first got mentioned. Now to come to conclusions, Zayd ibn Haritha was Muhammad's friend. Maybe they were the same age group. Now, my friends, most of them are the same age group. Of course, I can have a friend, someone as old as my father, but it's unlikely. It's not what you get every day. So they probably were even the same age. Muhammad asked Zainab to marry Zayd. She did, but she didn't like Zayd. Muhammad lusted over Zainab after he felt that their marriage was not going to work anyway. He then asked Zayd to leave him his wife Zainab. Zayd accepted the request because he didn't like Zainab anymore. Because she, of course, if she doesn't like him, then she will not make him feel good about herself. And because he believed Muhammad to be a true prophet. Zayd was identified as Muhammad's adopted son only during the Abbasid Caliphate by a scholar, again from Balkh. I like to keep saying this because it's very strange. Now, if you have oral tradition, it should survive around the same area. Because people say, well, what about the Aboriginals of Australia? They have certain stories that go far back. Well, yes, because they didn't move anywhere. Because the stories, they just stay where they are. Not a guy from Balkh can come tell me this. Al-Tabari, who was again from Iran, later adopted this story from this storyteller. I didn't call him that. Muslim sources call him that. He is a storyteller. He didn't even use the pseudoscience of Isnad. As time went on, the story got cemented in the collective memory of people. And thank you, but this is just the last thing. That it got cemented in the collective mind of people. Then it became as reality. And they abolished this, the idea of Muhammad didn't have the adopted son, because then if you do so, you will say that I am a prophet. Because in Islam, all the prophets are related. So if you are the son of Muhammad, then you are a prophet. And then we go into the whole Shia thing and we get into trouble. So this is another thing. I kept it out of this presentation. I wanted just to keep it about Zaid and Zainab. We do not have any evidence outside sources which are early enough to confirm that this guy was Muhammad's adopted son. And that's all I have to say for now. Back to you.
Yeah, this raises a lot of questions. And Paul Bishop is asking, oh, by the way, we have It's Yasin who says, this is a stupid channel. Well, hey, thank you for being here and watching. We appreciate it and hope you find this presentation thought-provoking. Paul Bishop says, he's asking about the Quranic passages. So let's move to that. What do you make of verses in Surah 33 that talk about the adopted sons? For example, we married her to you so that there should not be any blame on the believers concerning the wives of the adopted sons, 33-37. So what do you take that to be a reference to?
Well, actually, when you look at all this stuff in Aramaic, you will find that it's not referring to the Prophet of Islam whatsoever. So this is a whole revision. The idea that Muhammad is mentioned in these verses is in itself a problem. Actually, the word Zaid, if you read it in Arabic and open any dictionary, it means, in the Arab tongue, it simply means a random person. Zaid, the same thing as Amr. So Amr or Zaid, they just mean random person.
So a bit like saying Tom, Dick, or Harry, if you're making up a story.
Yes, when you look at it in the Aramaic, you will find that it's not this idea. You just get this after the Quran got Arabized and dotted and the critical marks are added.
Okay. Well, assuming the translation is relatively accurate, we married her to you. So you would say there is someone specific in mind, but this person's, the way they're described is not a proper noun. It's simply a reference to one of the early Muslims.
Exactly. And it could be about a prophet. It could be a biblical prophet. But I don't know really the underlayer of this.
Okay. Do you think it's problematic, the Uriah the Hittite comparison, because that portrays Muhammad as David? So why would they invent a narrative that makes Muhammad look so bad, do you think?
You see, if you look at the Umayyad Caliphate, Abdul Malik really liked David, and he called his son biblical names. And they named Sulaiman and they named other names like this. And he had the menorah on his coin. So the idea that you want to make Muhammad more like Jesus is there, more like David is there, everything is there. It has to do with a certain time and a certain coincidence that I'm not 100% sure what it is right now.
There's also, I know it's something
sorry,
that you, I know this is something that you probably didn't intend to bring into the presentation, but the idea was that the prophethood was something you inherit. So if you made sure that Muhammad had neither a biological son or an adopted son, then you cut off all possibility of future prophets so that you could affirm him as the seal of the prophets, the last of the prophets. Was that part of the purpose behind the story, do you think?
Yes, but what you are saying is in the Abbasid era, because if you take Muhammad as meaning the blessed one back in the Umayyad times and maybe even before, then it will be saying that Jesus never had any inheritance. And this will be even more accurate because in the Quranic text, they translated it as Muhammad is not the father of any of your men. This is a mistake in Arabic. Ma kana means he was not. Muhammad was not the father of any of your men. So it's in the past already.
Yeah.
That statement that Muhammad is not the father of any of your men, or the seal of the prophet statement, that was originally, and this is a point that Powers makes, that was originally in Ubay ibn Ka'b's Codex 461.6. So he proposes this was a later move to Surah 33 to address this prophethood problem. Because the thing with this story, it's so difficult because let's just say for a second that it was true. Let's say that Muhammad, just like we find in Ibn Sa'd, he took Zaid in front of the, there in Mecca and in front of the Kaaba, and he had this adoption ceremony and he proclaimed, like Ibn Sa'd says, this is my son. And Zaid was called Zaid ibn Muhammad because of what Mel mentioned with prophethood following through lines of descendants in the Quran. That would make Zaid a really good candidate for Muhammad's successor from a number of reasons. He would have been Muhammad's son. He was a military commander very close to Muhammad, one of the early believers, right? The first adult believer or the first believer, depending on which source you read. So there are a lot of really good reasons to cover this whole incident up, and a lot of really good reasons to move the statement about the seal of prophets from 61:6 to here in Surah 33 in the standard version. So that's the thing that's so difficult for this story, is that you can look at it both ways and say, well, it meets the criteria of embarrassment, but also it's not in any of the early sources, so it could be a later invention, but also we can understand why it wouldn't be in the early sources, because it creates a lot of problems for Muhammad being the final prophet. So any thoughts on that, Murad?
Well, I would ask you, what do you make of Saint John of Damascus saying that he was his friend or a co-worker? Don't you think that this is very strange also in the 730s?
It is. That's a very, very good polemical piece of material, and striking that he would leave that out. Particularly since he accused Muhammad of committing adultery, it would have been a great line to say, you committed adultery with your adopted son's wife. So yeah, I completely agree that St. John of Damascus missed a really good polemical opportunity. And once again, if the story was suppressed, then that could be why that part of the story wasn't made known, but later it surfaced in Islamic tradition. Very difficult to tell, but I'm just conducting some thought experiments here.
The reason why I chose my stance is because when you look at the pattern of how everything goes with Islam, you will find that everything comes in the Abbasids as an invention. There are a lot of things that were not there during the Umayyad times. So I think it's more likely that they made him his adopted son at a later stage, not that it was suppressed before.
I think there's also another aspect to all of this, is that it widens the possibilities for the caliphs. If the caliphs are looking to live a very immoral lifestyle, having Muhammad do similar things is very convenient for them. So if they wanted to grab someone's wife and include them in their harem, for example, having stories like this would facilitate that much easier. Would you agree with that, Murad? Or?
I think this is a little bit of a stretch. It doesn't have much to do with what we are saying. The caliphs used other stuff to do this, because the caliphs, they thought of themselves as God's representative, and you can see this in Patricia Crone's book, God's Caliph. So they weren't in need to make all this, acrobatic moves.
They would be totalitarian in their form of rule. So anything goes, really, because they are caliphs. They don't need to go beyond themselves for authority, essentially.
Yes, and there are other words in the Quran which are misunderstood. So they also contribute to the same problem of Zaid and him being the adopted son. So there is a much bigger case that you can make that he was actually never his adopted son, but this came in later. And the first to connect this, we get from the Islamic sources, that he was a storyteller and he didn't use the chain of isnad. He simply made it up. You see?
Yeah.
Paul Bishop asks, if the narrative is invented, do we find Surah 33 in any Quran manuscripts prior to 722? And Paul, I previously mentioned that Surah 33:40 specifically, Muhammad is not the father of any of your men, but the messenger of God and the seal of the prophets. God has knowledge of everything. Part of that verse is reported to have been in Ubay ibn Ka'b's codex at 61:6, where it has a completely different meaning. So I don't know that we can answer your question definitively, given the questions surrounding dating Quran manuscripts, but we do have reports, of course, of a specific verse within this narrative that was moved. And then, of course, Surah 33 is a hotbed for all kinds of controversy, with large amounts of verses being lost and so forth. So I think there are a lot of questions that we can ask overall of Surah 33. Mel, I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Yeah, not at all. I think one implication of this story is the fact that it illustrates very clearly how much stories have expanded over time. We can see how it's grown from an embryonic idea and then developed over the decades. And if that's true for such a central story, what does that say about the rest of the corpus of stories referred to as the Hadith? I think it's very damning, really, in terms of the overall body of the Hadith. That's it. That's my point on it.
Absolutely. Well, there are, of course, numerous examples of that. My favorite one is the one I made a video on recently, and that is talking about Muhammad endorsing the reading of the early companions, right? Well, what happened to that? You know, and how could you have such a hadith and have it be well known throughout the Muslim world, and then have al-Hajjaj saying he's going to kill people reading Abdullah ibn Masud's codex? How can you reconcile those two? If Muhammad was really the original prophet, he made this proclamation, it was well known, and then we have the governor of Abdul Malik saying, no, I'm going to completely reverse that and kill you if you use this reading. How do you reconcile those two things? Yeah, and some would just say, Mel, I think kind of what you're hinting at is, well, if it was composed later in the interest of the Abbasids, well, then we can have some explanatory power there.
Yeah.
Murad, are you taking requests? Because next for your Quran's translation, I would like to see Surah 33, 37 through 40. If you want to translate that, I'd be very interested in seeing your translation. And then also, after looking at the early manuscripts, I'd like to know what you believe the original reading was, if there were any interpolations or anything like that. So I hate to ask you publicly, but if you're taking requests, I'd love to see your translation of Surah 33 next.
Yes, I would love to do that. I actually, in the last video, I asked people to write down what they think is the most important so that I translate it.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure you had no shortage of requests.
I want to just say something regarding the Quran, if I may.
Absolutely.
I think that Abdul Malik ibn Marwan is the one who actually compiled all the Quran, because you have this very weird tradition that says that I was born during Ramadan and I was a caliph during Ramadan and I collected the Quran during Ramadan. Actually, this is Abdul Malik saying, and I went to it in Arabic to see what the Muslims are saying. And they say, well, jama'atu, it doesn't mean I really collected it. It means I remember it. And this is, of course, a hoax. Jama'atu means I collected it. So he is the one who collected it with his governor, Al-Hajjaj. And actually, we made a video. I made a video called The Historicity of the Quran. All of this is in there. Al-Hajjaj is the one who made this major revision. He put it in something called a codex. There was nothing before it like that. Before it, it was some proto, papers or something that was written probably by Salman the Persian and Omar and also Ali. But Muhammad had nothing to do with it. And just the idea that there are multiple readings of the Quran is also funny. How do you write what you say? Like, how do you write how it sounds? So this is another hoax. It's just an Aramaic, and then when they Arabized it, they got lost, and then they said, "Oh no, I read it this way. No, I read it this way. No, the Prophet liked this guy because he was his friend." No, something like this. You see?
Yeah, this is a really interesting period in Islamic history. And I asked Shadi Nasser when I had him on a couple of months ago, do you think Al-Hajjaj deserves his own stage of canonization, in the history of the Quran? And maybe as he returns to study the Uthmanic revision, he'll produce more work on that. But I know that Muslims are very quick to want to discount all of those, or minimize those traditions that talk about Al-Hajjaj making changes to the Quran and once again, destroying manuscripts or codices that don't align with his reading and so forth. So that's a very interesting period in history, and Muslims, especially today with the miraculous preservation of the Quran narrative, have every reason to conceal that or to discount those traditions. But I think there's more to Al-Hajjaj than the current standard narrative allows.
I think we can't get away from Hajjaj for several reasons. Is that you have in Armenian sources that he is the one who compiled the Quran, so this is one, and you have an Arab who is a Christian. I can't remember his name right now. Everything that I'm saying here is in the video, Historicity of the Quran. And he said the same thing. He made codex, and he made it like he made a codex, and he made 6 copies and sent it to all the regions.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No problem. I'll just take you off and go back to now it's just the 3 of us on. Okay. Yeah.
I think one of the
Yeah,
things to bear in mind as well that adds even more another layer of complication to all of this is that the original materials that they used when compiling the Quran might have been for a completely different purpose. And so there could have been a religious sect in the early part of the 7th century which were promoting a Judeo-Christian understanding of the Bible. And they had translated a lectionary into Arabic. And so they referred to this lectionary as a Kiriana, which is Syriac for lectionary. And this is the word that was used eventually for the Quran. And I know, Murad, you mentioned that the word that we use for the Holy Book of Islam has changed over time. Do you want to mention that? Because I think it's very relevant.
Well, the first mention for the Quran is actually called Book of Allah. So it wasn't called the Quran. This is what you find in the Caliph protocols. So I think this could be the first thing, Book of Allah. And actually the word kitab, when you think about it, it doesn't really mean something that is a book, which is a modern book. Kitab comes from maktub, means written. So whenever I see something called kitab, I think of a scripture or a paper that is written or something. That's why it could mean the Torah in some sense, and sometimes it could mean the Quran that we know. It could mean a lot of things. So people of the book could actually mean more people of the scripture. You see? So that would be more accurate.
And then the later name for it became Furqan.
Furqan, this is the name, the Purqan or Furqan. This is the name that actually Leo III used when he was talking with Omar II. He said, come on, don't let me start now. I know who compiled your Furqan. We all know about it. It was Al-Hajjaj. And this was very hard. So calling it the Furqan means like book of salvation or redemption, because this word in Syriac means salvation. So Moses, when he came out of Egypt, we gave him the book, we gave him the Torah and the Furqan, meaning and the salvation, meaning that he crossed the Red Sea. So maybe it was called the Furqan, which is book of salvation, something like this. Then later it got into Quran, meaning reading. This is the very new way of seeing it, reading. So it's the reading of Ibn Amir, reading of Hafs. So you see the evolution with every caliphate, it changes.
Speaking of the different readings, and I don't want to get, well, I don't know if you're okay, I guess, getting pretty far off topic from where we started, but that's fine. What reading are you translating in your translation of the Quran?
Well, I'm looking at Ibn Amir, which is the earliest, and if trusted, it will be an Umayyad document. And I see that it's more logic in some places. When it goes to the pronouns and stuff, Hafs is really very bad, because when they translate it in English and there is a lot of mumbo jumbo when it comes to pronouns, because here he's talking to one person and then as if all of a sudden he turns and talking to another person. Ibn Amir still has problems, but it's a lot better than Hafs.
It's one of those rare situations that later editions only get worse than the earlier versions. That's hard. It's really hard to imagine how they manage that.
Yeah, you would expect corruptions as time goes on, and that's what we see. That's why the variant readings multiplied, right? And there were multiple attempts to limit them. So very interesting.
Actually, if you look at the word Sab'a Qira'at, you will not find this in the Quran. You will only find another word, and this in Syriac, it doesn't mean 7 readings, which is Sab'a Mathani. It could mean in Aramaic a group of stories. It has nothing to do with 7 readings. And actually, they are not 7 readings, they are much more. So this is a hoax already.
Yeah.
You see? So cracking the Quran has to do with Aramaic and Hebrew and the Semitic languages.
Look forward to what you produce in the future. And that, I guess, brings us to the end of our live stream. So make sure after this live stream is over, you head on over to the Sneakers Corner channel. It's in the description box. And check out some more of Murad's work on the Quran translation and some more of Mel's work on early Islam as well. Mel, any closing words for us?
Nothing off the top of my head. I think we're constantly on a road of discovery. So what we say today may change in 6 months down the road. You know, we may make additional discoveries that clarifies things. And so essentially, I think we're going from a lower resolution understanding to a higher resolution over time. So keep your eyes peeled, as we say. You'll find that we'll make more discoveries as we go over the next few months.
Murad, thanks so much for joining us, and thank you for your presentation. Any parting words?
Well, I just want to say, when people look at Islam, don't just look at the dates. When did this guy die? When did this guy write? Just look also at the geography, because this is very strange. Just look, where did this guy come from? The 6 Sahah, which is Bukhari and Muslim and stuff, they're all from this Khorasan area, all from Iran. This should raise a very important question mark. So that's all I have to say, and thank you for having me today.
And we even see that with, I mean, where did the first caliph, right? Where, I mean, you know, how do you get way up north when Islam started in Mecca? So many questions. We could go off on another rabbit trail for sure with geography. Very good point, Murad. Thank you for that reminder, and thank you all for watching. I will see you next time.